Jon Summers is the motoring historian. He was a company car thrashing technology sales rep that turned into a fairly inept sports bike rider. Hailing from California, he collects cars and bikes built with plenty of cheap and fast, and not much reliable. On his show, he gets together with various co-hosts to talk about new and old cars, driving, motorbikes, motor racing, and motoring travel.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. It is Jon Summers, the motoring historian. Today, electric vehicle fires. Or more specifically, is there anything in what these conspiracy theorist types say about, EVs, they all catch fire? Because, instinctively, right? Yeah, a computer gets hot, but on the face of it, normal cars have like gasoline, and the gasoline runs in little rubber hoses right by the hot exhaust, right? That's what cars were like years ago. It just feels like instinctively a Chevy Chevelle is more likely to burst into flames rather than a Tesla. That's just how I feel about it. But notwithstanding the fact that obviously the Tesla can get in the sea, and I love a V8 Chevelle, even if it is going to catch on fire and burn it and myself to a crisp. But that's not why you tuned in, is it? You tuned in really for me to actually tell you whether or not this EV fire thing is actually, real or just some BS. So let's drill into that. And let's drill into that via a presentation that I had as another one of these Society of Automotive Engineer things that took place at Stanford. This is a couple of ways, not at Stanford, it's in Palo Alto at the Nordic Innovation House or something. I think that's the name of the venue. But anyway, the fellow who I saw present was called Dr. Abid Kemal, and he's a professor of thermal science at a firm called Exponent. Now, it's worth going to their website and looking at what they do, because basically, when that Boeing 747 or 737, when they kept on trying to, fly the plane at the ground and crash, Exponent were the people who Boeing came to be like, shit, the plane won't work properly, help us. They are these kind of process and material engineers, but ultra clever Stanford ones. Jeff Buys Cars, the YouTuber. He does all these things about EV, La La Land, and how terrible that they are. And so partly I went to this session so that I could reach out to him and say, these are the facts on EV fires. It took the presenter there, I can't read his name properly, I wrote it down, like Adid or Avid or something like that. I'm sorry, sir. You were very well informed and a terrific presenter, and I'm sorry I didn't write your name down properly, but not to worry. Kemal was the second name. I'll look him up on the website and connect him and all of that. So the point is that he spent a long time not really answering what would have been, Jeff Buys Cars, conspiracy theorist YouTuber. So Jeff had piqued my interest, right? Jeff had made me think, maybe there is something in this EV fires thing. I'll see what the Stanford perspective was. And I reached out to Jeff to be like, I'm going to this thing. Are you interested in what I learn? And I didn't hear back from him. Obviously, he's a YouTuber with 1 million subscribers, right? You know what I mean? He's probably got better things to be doing than responding to me. I'm not bothered by that. Right. But then just a couple of weeks later, he did another EV fires thing, being like, doom and gloom, these EV cars will be the death of us. And I'm like, no, dude, I gave you the chance to have the proper information and you just rejected it. So bit of a butthole, anyway, whatever. So Jeff, thanks for piquing me. But dude, you're a bit of an idiot, because the raw stats, it took this Kemal fellow a while to get there. But the raw stats, you can hear me leafing through my notes, can't you, to the end of the presentation here. But look, the number of vehicle fires since 1980 has decreased by half. Consistently, the study that he had showed, from like insurance data, showed that vehicle fires almost always occur in vehicles that are 10 to 20 years old. So it's that Chevelle where the fuel lines have got old and have started to crack. It does get on the exhaust. Those cars do catch fire. They always did. It seems like EVs are 5 times or 10 times less likely to actually catch fire. But there are circumstances where they do, and the way in which they do is different from the way that gas cars do. And what do I mean by that? I mean, they'll wreck, you'll get it on the back of the tow truck, the thing will catch fire afterwards. You'll get it in the tow yard, it won't move for 6 weeks, it'll still catch fire. Believe it or not, there are even stories of that happening in an LA tow yard. So that is fuel to the fire, forgive the pun, of folk like Jeff who are like, well, I'm afraid. I'll take my, Hillman Hunter with its cracked gas line spraying gas right onto the hot manifold. I'll take my risk of that fire that I can understand. I'll take that over, the EV fire that's all peculiar, and sometimes it catches fire and sometimes it doesn't, and there's not any real flame. And when you put water on it, it doesn't put the flame out and all of that. And that's just the case, the fire department needing to have the right fire to put it out. Or the other thing he said is a lot of them are like rollover accidents, or if the car's not rolled over, but the battery's caught fire, you can't actually spray the fire retardant where the fire is because the fire's on the battery that's in the floor of the car. So what are we saying here? We're saying that as society pivots to using more and more electric vehicles, the fire risk, whilst it's still there, is going to be significantly reduced. EV fires are different because with ICE cars, once you turn off the motor, there is no fire risk. The problem with EVs is there's still energy trapped in the battery. That energy has to go somewhere. It can't just sit in the gas tank inert. It has to go somewhere, and that's where there's the fire risk. And that's why the fires can happen, when the accident's over, when the car's on the back of the recovery truck or in the tow yard, and even weeks later if the circumstances are right. And what I'm going to talk about in the rest of this presentation is the stuff that he talked about as being, what goes wrong inside the battery for fires to happen. So stranded energy causes the fires. Getting it all out, that's the holy grail. Because if you can suck it all out, there's no chance of fire. Coming back to the top of my presentation, 15% of total fires are EVs. And by that, he includes pure BEVs and hybrids as well. I don't know why I had that stat up there, because I'm going to jump around now and just tell you a little bit about Exponent. It's a firm of Stanford grads that started about 30 years ago. Hundreds of PhDs, that was what I wrote down here. So, and projects they were involved in were the Toyota unintended acceleration. They also talked about, this is something, if you're in the Bay Area, you'll remember it, but there was a gas explosion in San Bruno a couple of years ago, and they looked at what it was that had caused that. And the Boeing Max flying at the ground, that was them that did the analysis and the fix on that. So that's big cheese shit, isn't it? Like, let's call a spade a spade. Now, the next thing he did was he did a sort of, how did we get here? It always amuses me when scientists do the history piece. Right? Because as scientists, they always want to be able to say, first there was the Cugnot steam chariot. Then there was, Carl Benz and his wife who patented, they want to have this, after one comes two and after two comes three kind of story. And of course, history doesn't work like that. And we historians, we just love to change our mind about whether three really came before two, or whether three is really more than two, or whether three is actually more like one. We as historians really love having those kind of debates, and scientists tend not to want to do that. And as an automobile historian, you exist in this place where so many of the people writing auto history are engineers who need this A, B, C, D, E kind of path. And as a trained historian, you're actually unwilling to go down that kind of path. And this is why auto history does not exist in history departments as such. We exist under technology history, and the more interesting bits of automotive history, I think, almost fit in philosophy of history. But look, I don't want to fall down. I have fallen down that rat hole, haven't I? But the point is, right, that he positioned up, the history of, how did we get to where we were? 1859, the first lead acid battery. Gaston Planté, apparently. 1888, I think that says. First production EV. This was a chap called Thomas Parker in England. In 1900, 28% of vehicles were electric. Did we know that? Of course, we car guys did. The Baker Electric and all of that. And I certainly can never forget that French count whose name escapes me, but whose car held the land speed record for a bit. And he called it La Jamais Content, the Never Happy. And he named it after his wife. So that 28% statistic of, all vehicles, that's before the Model T, and it's before Rockefeller and oil consolidation. So, really between those two things, I don't know, it'd be interesting to do the research into it properly, but my sense is between those two things, those are the things that really did for early electric cars and ever need to. 1916, the Woods dual power hybrid. Oh, I've missed the 1902 Studebaker Electric that had a 40-mile range and had regenerative brakes. He made the point that, all these batteries, all these EVs, it's all about lithium ion flow, and it's about making that flow rate work effectively. And it's about making sure that even though you have many, many battery cells, you don't have a failure rate. So the example that he gave was that Tesla came to Exponent years ago saying the failure rate of their cells was about 1 in a million, and that was not a good enough rate for them to be able to start building cars in a meaningful way. So they came to Exponent to say, how do we reduce the failure rate of these cells? One thing that I did think was quite interesting was he did refer to EVs as glorified golf carts whilst talking himself about driving a BMW 740. So the cause of fires in EVs comes from a single cell warming up. And the way that these things are laid out is that there's hundreds of these cells. Well, the way to perhaps think about it is something like a Prius. Is under the back seat, there's something that looks like a giant cooler. Almost, it looks a bit like the power pack, almost looks a bit like if you've seen tool chests in the bed of a pickup truck. Those tool chests that go right up against the cab, those kind of tool chests. It looks like something like that. And inside it, when you open it up and take it apart, there's all these sliced modules of cells. So you can sort of pull them out almost like toast out of a toaster. Then the individual cells are within each slice. So the reason that I know that is that Hubnut did a video just recently where he tried to successfully did repair the battery on a Toyota Prius. I'll include the link for him doing that. But the way that he did that was went to a specialist and, rubber gloves and all of that. And it is a bit frightening because the voltages are so huge that it just fucking fry you and kill you if you made a mistake. So there is, that element of it. And, when he was there he went to an EV dealer who he's friends with, and he did the work, but he had the guy that deals in these secondhand EVs. He had him work with him basically for that reason of safety. And the tools, like the screwdrivers, have got big rubber handles on them, and they were wearing marigold, washing up gloves to be doing the work. And what Hubnut was saying is the business of taking the pack out or accessing the pack wasn't too difficult, but the business of when you put the pack back together, making sure that it's all cross-referenced in the right way. He had the specialist do that. And that to me looked like being a pretty hideous job. I guess the other part of it is that it's not just enough to pop another slice of toast in, so to speak. You have to balance the load across the cells. And part of the reason why I'm sharing this is I think you can tell how slim my understanding is of the topic, but I do feel like we're in a place now where there's beginning to be a raft of specialists who are able to replace, and you as and me as a car enthusiast is able to recognize, well, have we replaced just one slice of toast there, or have we replaced the entire power pack? Because if we've done the whole power pack, that's going to be better than just one slice of the toast and then having to balance the cells across the whole power pack with the new bank of cells inserted. But in essence, what happens, and the language that this physicist fellow, thermal dynamicist specialist, used, because that's basically what the bloke was. The bloke was just like a specialist in fire and explosions. He talked about EV fires as being runaway thermal events. At first, you're a bit like, oh, adult beverage. It's not really that, because what we're saying is that one cell, there's a fault in the manufacturing somewhere. It's just a bit weak for some reason. And after the cycles of charge and recharge and charge and recharge and, the ions flowing backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards and forward, it gets hot and it starts to fail. And as it starts to fail, not just that one gets hot, it heats up its neighbors as well. And that's what happens, is that if it heats up its neighbors as well, and the neighbors become damaged, eventually, and he did show, he showed video of this happening, that, if you can, if you can spot it coming, and get coolant to it within half a second, you might stop it catching fire. But fundamentally, when you can spot a little bit when it starts to get overheated, but the thermal runway path is quite short. So think of it, one burst catches fire. So if in a situation where a car's had a wreck and has caught fire, the fire brigade come and they put out the fire, but the energy is still sitting in the battery, and all the cells around the one that caught fire, they're all still damaged. Even more now, if there's been a fire, probably the whole battery's damaged and there's hundreds of cells which are damaged. So it's very easy to imagine how fires could start again. And if you layer into the fact that, when the Chevelle is on fire, you spray fire at the top of it and the fire goes out. You don't open the hood and the fire goes out. Whereas if it's in a battery that's underneath, unless the car's turned over, how are you even going to spray the retardant onto it? Has the fire people even been trained to look out for this kind of thing? So it's just everyone being trained and ready to fight this new kind of fire that is the risk that the EVs represent. And I do think it's interesting that whether it's the 10 to 20-year-old, Chevelle or Hillman Hunter that catches fire, or whether it's the 10 to 20-year-old Tesla that catches fire, it's still technology, which is fundamentally, it's a lot of energy. It's a lot of energy which is stored, and that storage, as the mechanism of storing it becomes used up, it is likely to catch fire. However, the Tesla at 10 years old is still a whole lot less likely to catch fire than the Hillman Hunter was, or, whatever other silly example it was I was just giving. So it's not that there's nothing in what the conspiracy theorists are saying. These EVs do catch fire in really weird and spooky ways, but for Christ's sake, it's just not very many of them. So Jeff, you're misinforming people with this. And when I offered to correct you, you just ignored me. So I'm a little disappointed by that. There's a little bit of deliberate misinformation going on in the anti-EV world. Who knew? What a surprise. Yeah, so now they stack cells, but what they used to do is roll them up. So it used to be they used to do them all flat and then they would roll it all up. But that's an older design now and less efficient. So the specifics of the thermal runaway event are this. That first, the heating starts because of the cycling backwards and forwards, and because that cell is maybe just less efficient than its neighbors. And if the heating is allowed to continue unchecked, the plastic around the cell softens and melts. That causes the electrolytes, which is the secret source of the battery that determines the electron flow and, is why your Leaf battery claps out after a short amount of time, whereas Tesla batteries seem to last far longer. The electrolyte fluid boils. The boiling of the electrolyte fluid creates O2, and that's the first ingredients then for a full normal fire. Yeah, he showed us a video of a rolled up cell, so an older style cell. He showed it in slow motion, and basically the whole thing, the process from okay to full-on fire was 200 milliseconds. I mean, it kind of boggled the mind a little bit. So just like with a gas car, if there's a tank full of gas, the fire risk is much worse than if there's not a tank full of gas. So if you're on 80% state of charge, the fire risk there, for an EV which has wrecked and been damaged, if the battery pack has been physically damaged, because if you hit it with a hammer or you smash it, in fact, here's a really interesting comparison that he gave. The plane companies have in place a whole bunch of, tray tables, upright kind of policies that are specifically around making sure that it's the phone drop, right? They're always like, we'll help you find the phone, all of that. It's because hell or high water, they don't want the phone to be trapped in the reclining chair. Because if the phone or an iPad or a computer's trapped in one of the reclining seats, you recline it, you break the device, you damage the battery, you bend the device, you damage the battery. That is why laptops and cell phones can burst into flames for exactly the same reason. The cell's damaged and it leads to this breakdown and then, the full-on release of energy in the form of fire. So with a full battery, the fire is going to be briefer and more intense. You remember there was that incident where a car ferry had caught fire not so long ago. I'll include a link to it. I think there were multiple incidents, but what that has led to is that the shipping companies are demanding that the cars ship with a less than 50% state of charge to avoid the fire risk. Because if they have a fuller battery, the fire, there's just, there's more gas to burn, right? It's that simple. It's in a different form, but nonetheless, the stored energy, if there's an issue with that, with how the energy is stored, if a cell fails, if there's a fault in the manufacturing, you have this runaway thermal event. And, it always existed, right? The Hillman Hunters on their way being shipped to Iran. Did you know there's lots and lots of Hillman Hunters in Iran? There's a whole sidebar about Hillman Hunters being made aftermarket. But let's imagine the first Hillman Hunters, they were actually shipped as knockdown kits and built in Iran. But no, let's imagine the cars being shipped on the ferry in the same way. For every 100,000 Hillman Hunters, one might have a cracked fuel line, mightn't it? And that car might leak gas, and when you fire it up to drive it off the ferry, it might catch fire. Just exactly in the way that the EVs have. So he wanted to talk about some particular issues. One of them was that in 2021, all Chevy Bolts had a recall and they replaced all the batteries. So it's like 140,000 batteries replaced. Apparently it cost GM $2 billion to do it. But the thing that they did with the replacements was they limited charging to 80%, because when they were carrying more than 80% charge, that was when there was a fire risk. The other example he had, and you may remember this, was that Hyundai had fire issues in 2022 and were telling people to park their cars outside because of the fire risk. But these were ICE cars. It just goes to show that even, there's modern versions of Hillman Hunters being built with cracked fuel lines because there's just so many components on modern cars. So it only takes one little slip twixt cup and lip and you can find yourself in this kind of situation. There is a conclusion to be drawn from that, isn't there? That are EV fires a real thing? Yes. Is it important that we train our firefighters and all of the infrastructure around accident prevention, tow truck drivers, all of that? Is it important that everyone understands that these things catch fire in a different way from the way that gas cars do? Oh, yes, for sure. But the fundamentals of it, most cars don't catch fire. Some do. If there's a fault in manufacturing, we're working really hard to try and limit the number of faults in manufacturing. We're much better now than we were years ago. These EVs are orders of magnitude better than modern, even the gas-powered cars of the 2010s, let alone the gas-powered cars of the 70s and the 80s for fire risk. It's a bit of a storm in a teacup, that, isn't it? Sure, we need to be afraid. Sure, the fires are different from other kinds of fires, but really, this is a bit of a non-story, isn't it? So there you go. That's my 2 cents on EV fires. Thank you, Drive Through.
This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.